Hi, this is Kyle, and this is our last planned video on the subject of creating and using classes in VB. The first thing we should probably do is go and look at some code. Well, not the code, we'll look at the form. We're going to look at the form and the interactions between the form and the class we've prepared. So the last few videos have been discussing a certain class, and now we're going to look at the form that uses the class. If I run this form, we're going to see it accepts a name, it accepts a number of hours, let's say 20 hours at $20 an hour. And so we'll calculate the person's pay. 20 by 20 is 400, and so yes, that makes sense. We have the option to clear it, and we have a summary value that we'll look at momentarily. Let's clear. We'll put in a new name again. This one will be Kyle. And Kyle works 60 hours making these crazy videos, and he is drastically underpaid. Well, let's say 20 again for consistency. And so I don't make nearly that much. But there's some pay as an example. This will allow me, the summary button will bring up a new form, and this summary form shows me that I've created 2 employees. The overtime hours, they're only coming from this Kyle instance where he's worked 20 hours more than 40, and the total payroll has added up all the pay so far. These are coming from those shared summary variables. You'll also notice that this summary form is modal, which means I can't access other parts of the program until I actually close this form, and we'll have that in some of our classwork. Let's actually look at the form code and what's happening here. We've got one big significant event called the button calculate click. Well, that's the event handler. Here we see that a payroll object is declared but not yet instantiated. We're going to have 2 variables for the input hours and the input rate. And here validation is being done in part with a try parse. And this useful feature is used to determine if something can be parsed to a certain value. And if it is, then it'll actually store it in this variable, so the input hours. So then we can check. We know that this is a valid decimal number. If the form hours are greater than 0, we'll try and do the same thing with the rate. Try parse is very useful for things like this. Here's where we instantiate our payroll object. So it was declared above, and it's instantiated here. And this is using the parameterized constructor. So it's giving it a value for hours and a value for the rate. So at this point, that's happened. Because of the constructor that we looked at in the previous video, we know that that object is instantiated. The values for the rate and hours and even the pay have been determined. Even though they're private variables, they're all being set using those set properties that were used in the constructor. Those have all been set, and our summary values have been updated. And then we can see here that it's going to format the pay as a currency and put that in a text label. If it doesn't pass validation, there's going to be some validation messages below. The next thing you're going to see here is the behavior of the summary button, and literally all this little method does is call the other form, the summary form, and use this show dialog to actually display it. Let's have a look at that. This is the code for the summary form, and all it's doing is once the form is activated, a funny thing it's doing here is it's actually using the non-parameterized constructor, the default constructor, the empty one. It's instantiating a summary object without doing anything. It's not using any of those sets that are happening in the parameterized constructor or the findPay method. This is only being done as an alternative way of demonstrating a way to access the properties of one of these objects or of the class. Because everything displayed on the summary form is a shared variable, it's possible to access it as an attribute of the object or as an attribute of the class. So here you can say payroll, and it's referring to the class. And it's getting the overtime hours, and it's formatting it as a certain type of value. And here we see the same thing with the total pay, formatting it as currency. Here it's using it as a property of an object, and you can see it generates a warning in Visual Studio. It technically works, but what it's saying is this is an object, what you actually want is the class property. And so kind of a soft conversion is happening there, and you'll see a warning, but technically it'll work. There's really no reason to instantiate this object like this, because I could replace this with the word payroll, and I would find that it works properly. It would be accessing the shared variable through the class rather than an object. It is possible to access instance properties, and it's always using the object name. So the pay object was one instance of the payroll that was created, and here's how you would display the pay. Similar is done with the rate here. So it's possible also to access the shared property using the class name. Actually, that's usually what you'll do. So here in this case it was payroll.overtimehours.toString. Or you can use the object name, which works but raises a warning and really doesn't save you any confusion or time. That's about all I need to say about accessing object properties, and that means we're done this series on object-oriented programming. Until I find there's a little fire I need to put out or something.